Thank you, troopers, for still being here at the end of the day. I'm the last one. We're glad about that. So you may wonder, at a symposium about women's experiences in Antarctica, I chose to talk about South America instead. And it's certainly not because I have not had an Antarctic career. And it's certainly not because I haven't had incredible opportunities and experiences in Antarctica. There are a couple things that led me to this choice, and one was hearing Terry Tickhill a couple years ago, and she did an amazing job of not only portraying her own experiences, but also sort of painting the envelope that the system was trying to contain women scientists in. And I thought, oh, that would be interesting for me to present from my own experience. And the other thing was really the discussions about Me Too, which are all about power balance and situations of power imbalance, which is very true in academia. And all my times in Antarctica, and I'll calibrate myself for you, I'm post-Husky, pre-Prairie Lab, so there you go. But I went down my very first time as the science PI, a principal investigator. In fact, every single time I've had a field season in Antarctica, I've been a PI or co-PI, right? So in theory, I was in the power seat there, right? And thanks to many of the women you've already heard about today, right, I could do that, and it was reasonably accepted. Let me leave it there. But that was really not the case at all when I started my research and became involved in science. So I thought, okay, that's a story I can tell about what it was like for me learning how to be a scientist. And so that was my choice. So, nonlinear, that's probably true of most of us, right? I'm going to tell you a little bit about my circuitous pathway to exploring the geology of Antarctica for most of my career. And so, it began here. I'm from Detroit, and specifically the suburbs of Detroit. After World War II, houses were being built outward into suburbia, and you can see the nice grid pattern of cookie cutter houses that were developed. And within about a mile or two in this scene here, I was born, I went to school, I lived for 18 years. This was my universe. And interestingly to me, this place here, which was about 2 city blocks and had no undergrowth because it wasn't safe, was wilderness in my book. That's what I grew up thinking wilderness was. I had no experience whatsoever with what that was. So it's kind of an unlikely origin story for what I've ended up doing, but there you have it. So then I had to go make my choice about going to university, and I didn't have a lot of choice because I didn't really have any money, so I went to my state school, University of Michigan. And high school for me was pretty boring. There was almost no science involved in it, but somehow at the end of it, I decided that the least boring thing was science. And the only women scientists that I had any knowledge of it all were Sylvia Earle and Eugenie Clark. So I concluded I was going to be a marine biologist, and I knew nothing about what that meant, but I went to Michigan and I enrolled to do that. I enrolled in the oceanography department, which was in the College of Engineering. So there I joined the guys, the engineering guys, learning how to use my slide rule, and there I was. However, a random academic advisor who signed me up for classes signed me up for geology class when I was a freshman. And I discovered plate tectonics, which was the coolest thing that I'd ever encountered. And he also pointed me to geology field trips. And my first summer in school, I went out west on a field trip and started to get an inkling of what wilderness was. And so within a year or two, I was switched to a geology major. And it turned out that the culture of geology really suited me. Resonated with me, so I stuck with it. So then I had to go work at graduate school, or I wanted to. I was into it at that point, and I went to Columbia University, Lamont, in New York, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And when you show up in that situation, the graduate committee assigns you, and I was assigned to marine heat flow. And they asked me to start crunching numbers from measurements that had been made from ships. And that did not interest me at all. And fortunately for me, there was a mentor and friend from undergraduate who's on sabbatical at Lamont, Rob Vanderhoo, who knew me better than I knew myself at that point. And he said, well, you know, you should talk to Ian Dale about structural geology. I think that would really suit you. And so I did. And here I am, I'm young. I actually included these because Anne helped me get some slides together for these slides. But she sent them to me and she said, boy, Jerry, you look so young. And I'm sure Anne didn't mean to imply that I don't look really young now. But you gotta admit, I look really young. So luckily for me, at the moment that I was knocking on Ian Dale's door, he had a woman graduate student, Margie Winslow, who was about to go down in the field, and she needed a field assistant. And so I was in the right place at the right time. And after the end of my first semester at Columbia, I was off to the land of Magellan and Charles Darwin and the uttermost parts of the earth with Margie. And so I'm going to tell you about a few experiences here that were very formative for me. The first one with Margie, we flew down to Punta Arenas and went all around the Strait of Magellan into this sound over here. And then we were down in Tierra del Fuego, and I did my PhD up here, and eventually went down towards the Drake Passage. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how that went. And so this is a joke, this RV Viking. This is a boat that was chartered to take us around to do geology. It's about less than 40 feet long. It was a fishing boat. It was chartered by the Chilean National Oil Company. And so this is what we use to get around to look at the geology. And, you know, it's really remarkable. At the time I started graduate school, you know, I don't know how many grad students there were, maybe 125, I don't know. I could count the number of women grad students on less than 2 hands. But I went down with this group of 3 women, and Margie Winslow, who's on the right here, she was doing her PhD research on the structure of this area. And in the yellow parka is Lucy Johnson, who was a assistant professor of archaeology at Vassar, who wanted to study the shell middens on tectonically uplifted paleo shorelines. So the 3 of us went out with this crew of that small boat. And Margie has written a couple of very engaging memoirs about this. We haven't encountered them. They're very interesting memoirs. She speaks to the time I went with her in Over My Head, and Anne is part of her adventure in dreadfulness. So it's worth, you know, having a read if you're interested in those things. But this is what we did. Our little boat is out here, right? We had to get shore because we were looking at rocks. So the way we did that was in this conveyance, this rowboat, and yeah, okay, that had its own adventures. And so there we went, and when we got on shore, we'd walk down the coast as far as we could. If there was a river, we'd try to cross it, or we'd just have to wait to get picked up again. And sometimes we tried to thrash through the underbrush. That's the one on the right there. And I want to, we went to the same place as Charles Darwin went for a hike, and I was going to read it off the screen, but I'm very resourceful. I brought a book with a quote. Remember books? So Charles Darwin, when he made this hike here, said, it was scarcely possible to crawl along. It was so completely barricaded by great moldering trunks which had fallen down in every direction. Our descent was not quite so laborious as our ascent, for the weight of the body forced a passage, and all slips and falls were in the right direction. And that really describes what it's actually like. So we also had an opportunity, and people lived there, and we had the opportunity to stop at many remote estancias and get to know people. I had never encountered lamb or mutton in my life in Detroit. Had more greasy mutton soup than I even want to think about. But super interesting to have the cultural experience of meeting these people. This little boat had no amenities. This is how we got our water. There was no usable toilet. And so we had to like hang on the rear guardrail and swing our butts over the side. Yeah. And we did get a lot of fresh fish. That was nice. And so Margie did a lot of research. She published a lot of science about the evolution of the Andes Mountains in that area. What did I get out of it? Well, you know, I'll never actually ever forget when we took off. It was an interesting time in Chile. It was only 3 years after the military coup in Chile. There was a curfew. You could not be out at night. We had to get special permits and blah, blah, blah. And in this case, when we left, we had to leave Punta Arenas, the dock, before midnight because otherwise we couldn't go. And so the weather was bad. There was stormy swell. But we went off into the moonlight, and I thought, oh, what's this all about? But I just, you know, was so moved. It was, the moon was out. This is not my picture, but the moon was out. We were going off of the Strait of Magellan. And, you know, what I felt was exhilaration. Like, wow, I get to do this. And I loved the physical challenges, the wilderness, the culture, the history, the geology. I was with this group of women. We had camaraderie and hard work and good fun. And, you know, that was all just amazing, right? So obviously I was hooked right away. But there's just a little hint of some of the things to come in my career. And so I'm going to just read you another little quote. These are Margie's words. And she said, "My training methods with poor Terry weren't much better than I had received from my predecessors. Terry's quiet manner made it easy to ignore her. Easy to ignore her and concentrate on the rocks." Now, does that sound like me? Like people who know me, does this sound like me? No, I was already at that stage. I recognize it more clearly in hindsight. You know, I was already had a little bit of what we call imposter syndrome, right? I thought I should somehow magically already know all these things, and I didn't really know what she was doing, but I didn't want to ask a question and reveal that I didn't know, and so I was quiet, and that was a bad thing, not a good thing. But okay, so on we went, and next, actually only a few months later, so by this time I was the ripe age of 23, we went down for another cruise. So we flew this time to Argentina, went to Ushuaia here on the Beagle Channel. We were supposed to go out and look at the geology of islands along the coast, but we couldn't get permits to go there. So plan B, we went, and I was again a field assistant for another PhD student. And so we went here along the Beagle Channel and looked at this mountainous region called the Cordillera Darwin. And we went, this is Cordillera Darwin, it's this amazing high glaciated massif, very interesting geologically. That we went to, it was winter, it was July, austral winter, it was July. So all my slides are dark because it was dark, it was winter. So I went on Hero, and this is a vessel that was the U.S. Antarctic Program's vessel that serviced Palmer Station and supported science. And people in this room, you've already heard about the Hero. So it was a ship built to work in ice, not an icebreaker, but it had a hull that was built to work in ice. And this was a long-term Captain Lenny, who was master, and Claire mentioned Captain Lenny. Captain Lenny was legendary for navigating in these uncharted waters, and he was also legendary for not liking women on his boat. He did not like when I was born. And I was a few years after Claire, but he hadn't changed. So he never really talked to me ever, but he talked to other people, and he only ever called me the girl. I did not have a name. I was the girl. And when I first got on the ship, he announced to everybody that they were not to have anything whatsoever to do with the girl. And he installed me in a room in the stern of the ship. It was away from all the rest of the crew, so I would be isolated. However, there was an engineer across the hallway within 10 minutes was inviting me over for a drink on the dry ship. Yes. And for some reason, then, in hindsight, I don't understand, they had a system, the steward of the ship woke everyone up in the morning. And so the steward would open my door and leer at me every single morning of this cruise. And he tried to entice me to be interested in him, but trying to give me bangles that he actually was taking to give to whores when he got to his port of call. And he didn't understand at all that this wasn't gonna go over with me. But, you know, it didn't. It was like an interesting environment, let me say. So here's what we were doing. We were on the Hero. We cruised into these fjords to look at the geology. It really hadn't been studied at all, so we were really discovering some of the geology. We get off on these rubber inflatable zodiacs. This was a super nice day. Mostly in the fjords, it was more like this. It was icy, and on you went in your zodiac. We needed to get on shore, and it was winter. So on your left there is an ungraceful moment of trying to navigate the icy outcrop. And on the right is the alternative. We just stood on the nose of the boat and took our measurements with our compasses without getting off. And in doing this, this was another student's PhD, Eric Nelson. And you can see, maybe in my eye, it's super obvious, but to you, there's big, massive folded layers. There's a whole mountainside. We were studying how these mountains formed and the forces that created the deformation and uplift of these mountains. We had some real adventures on this trip. Our very first day, so we started, there's a lot of politics here, we started in Argentina because the Hero was berthed in Argentina at this time, but we were immediately going into Chilean waters, and we had gotten the permits and whatnot. But the first fjord we went into was right across the border into Chile, and we got in the Zodiac and got onto shore, and within minutes, shots were being fired over our head, and somebody was yelling, "Manos arriba!" Yeah. And they were serious. There was a little military outpost there, and they had not been informed that, you know, we were coming and we were okay. And they marched us into their little hut with our hands up, all of us. And then eventually got on the radio, and off we went again doing geology. On another day, these are uncharted waters, and we sailed up this fjord and ran around on a shallow bank. It was probably a terminal moraine from one of the glaciers, and we were completely stuck. And we were listing way over to the side, and we lived like this. We couldn't get off, but they'd wait for high tide and really blast the propellers. And when they did that, the first time we just listed over to the other side. And so then we leaned that way for a while. And so we couldn't get off, and so we got a vessel from the Chilean Navy to come down and try to pull us off. They couldn't do it. We got a second vessel from the Chilean Navy, bigger. They tried to pull us off. We couldn't do it. And so in this slide on the right, and it's dark, so you probably can't see it very well, but the ultimate solution was we got all the crew from these Chilean naval vessels, and they all got on the deck of the Hero, and at high tide, everybody pulled and blasted the propeller, and everybody ran back and forth and on the ship, and we did come free. So, yeah. the joke at the time, because of course, you know, not only was I the only woman before, but I was the only woman now with all these people. And so they said, well, we'll just swing Terry from the mast and everybody went forward. And, you know, that was kind of funny, but it was also kind of menacing. And so, you know, back, this gorgeous place, you know, really amazing geology, but I learned some different things on this cruise. I mean, I learned about politics, where you can go and not go in geology. I learned about harassment and bias. And interestingly to me, this imposter syndrome stuff, you know, what it really meant to me at the time was, you know, I wanted to be able to hold my own with these male geologists, even though I was a first-year graduate student. You know, I didn't know squat, but I didn't know enough to admit that. And it's interesting to me that, you know, it wasn't the fact that I was the only woman there. I didn't care. It was, you know, it didn't seem risky to me. I was happy. It wasn't the harassment. Even that didn't bother me. It was like I wasn't knowledgeable enough, I thought to myself, you know, and that I think is typical for women, unfortunately. And so I went on to do my own thesis. I did that a few hundred kilometers north in Patagonia, next to the Patagonian ice sheet. And I had the privilege of doing my thesis in one of the most beautiful places on the planet. It's Torres del Paine National Park. The area is called Ultima Esperanza, which is a great name for your thesis area. It means last hope. And so what I did for my thesis, this is looking across this area, and the Paine Massif is this beautiful terrain here. I did a transect basically across here, looking at the geology and the structure, most of it on foot. And I spent a lot of time. I'm going to turn around and look the other direction from here, right on the edge of the ice sheet, the Patagonian ice field, where it had been recently just deglaciated. There's this gorgeous, unvegetated, perfect, 100% outcrop. Really amazing. And just a few slides of doing it. Of course, our land now, we're not on a ship, so we have to get across these darn rivers. There were ferries, you had to pull yourself across with the rope, and then if somebody wanted to get back, they had to pull the ferry back to the other side. More often, we tried to drive and get stuck until the horse or oxen pulled us out. Sometimes there was infrastructure. Or sometimes we just took the pants off and off we went. That's Ian, actually. So most of my work ultimately was done via backpacking on foot. And the slide on the left here, this is my pack. I'm taking the picture. It's very embarrassing. Look at all that stuff hanging off it. And inside it were like cans and jars and things you do not want to backpack with. And I just didn't know what I was doing, frankly, and suffered the consequences. But of course, you gradually figure that out. And I'm a great advocate of learning things the hard way. Lessons that you do not forget. So this is what we did. A special cultural note again. I'm going to call this my logistics hub for my thesis. And the guy on the left here, he lived there. He'd actually lived there his entire adult life, looking after cattle. They just made this a national park a couple years beforehand, and so they just let him keep living there. And so he was my support crew, right? Particularly when I was working solo. He would carry my stuff on the horse. He'd carry me across the river. He'd fend off predatory park rangers when that was appropriate. He was a very special part of my experience. I had lots of field assistants. This is Ian Dial, my PhD advisor. He actually wasn't with me very much, but there you go. We talked a little bit about wool clothes. This was the era of wool clothes, and interestingly enough, where I got those, my sister who's here, lives in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. They had a big Air Force base, and so I go to St. Vincent de Paul's and scoop up all the old Air Force woolen clothing, and you know, that's what I wore. Worked great, a little heavy. And also, Anne Bruno came down as my field assistant in my last field season. So as I got the opportunity to go with Margie Winslow, and came down to work with me, and also with Margie, and of course, as you guys know, and then went to do her PhD, had her own amazing Antarctic career. So I made maps, I figured out how these mountains formed and conceptual models. It was all great. I'd like to just give a little acknowledgement and make a point. Andiel gave a lot of women opportunities to do this kind of remote field work at a time that this was not common. So Margie, myself, Anne, Kieran Schmidt, Ian took Janet Thompson, who is a geologist at the British Antarctic Survey, to Antarctica on his field team at a time that BAS did not allow women to go to the ice. So one thing we've heard at this meeting from a lot of people is that people in situations can make opportunities, right? That's how a lot of us got to do what we were doing. And so I'd like to acknowledge Ian for making those opportunities. I also, it wasn't until quite a lot later in life that I wondered whether the mandate he gave me to go do this field work was actually because he believed in my skills or benign neglect. But you know, it didn't matter because I was completely empowered at that time. He never said to me, like, Terry, you're a girl, be careful. You know, he never said anything that he didn't say to any of the other guys. And that was super important for me at that time. So just a couple other sort of Me Too-like reflections from me about all this experience here is that, you know, I had more than one time I had men in Chile tried to force themselves on me. I resisted. The circumstances were such that it didn't go any further, thanks goodness. But I was always under examination, let's call it. You know, was I a sexual prospect, or what was my power and legitimacy? Like, they'd look at me like, oh, how could you be in charge, right? Etc. kind of thing. It was harder. And quite literally at that time, there was no one that I could tell this to, let alone report it to. I mean, there were not any other women in senior positions that I could talk to about it. But I was really fiercely focused on proving that I could do this and I could hold my own in this environment. And I think I would never have, if I had the opportunity to report it to somebody, I would not have. Right? Because that would have had a negative impact on my future. And a disturbing thing to think about for me is that, you know, that story is very little different than what we learned not so long ago that Jane Willibright did, right? And I find that unfortunate and disturbing. But on the other hand, you know, another just comment I wanted to make, and this is funny, but I was reading this interview with Patti Smith, who's a musician, poet. And of course, they had to ask her the Me Too question. And this is what she said. You know, I find myself more concerned about atrocities against women globally. I think we have to examine what's an atrocity, what's an insult, and what is somebody being a pain in the ass. And, you know, at my time to do what I wanted to do in my field, I basically had to put everything in the pain in the ass category because I wanted to do that. You know, I didn't really have another avenue. So I wish I could say it changed more. So real quick, I know I'm going on too long here. So I finished my PhD. I went to Africa for 2 years to teach, got hired at Ohio State. The first thing I did was go back to Chile, creeping closer to Antarctica, and then first went to Antarctica from here. So I went to the Diego Ramirez Islands, which are these little bits. Everybody thinks Cape Horn is the southern bit, but no, these islands are. And I went on the Polar Duke, the next U.S. Antarctic program vessel. And here they are. They're these tiny little islands. The largest one is a couple of kilometers long. They're very small. Note the swell and the surf and the cliffs. And the green stuff is tussock grass. So it was a challenging place to work. Getting on shore in the swell onto rocks that were wet and covered with kelp was part technique, part luck. And I ended up in the drink, but got pulled out right away. The accessible coves were all guarded by local wildlife. Those were not an option. And we found that our way to make our way across the island to look at the geology was through these albatross rookeries. The black-browed and sooty albatross have rookeries on these islands. We called them Byrd highways because they'd gotten rid of all the tussock grass, and we walked right through them. It didn't disturb the birds. They never left their nests, but they would bray really loudly and slap their paddle feet, and that din is absolutely an unforgettable experience I had. We also had, this is not my photo, but we also had hurricane force winds and 45-foot waves. I was in my bunk through that, so not my picture, but wow, wild place. So finally, I'm just going to finish arriving in Antarctica in my last couple of minutes. And of course, here I was at Ohio State with all these Antarctic geology experts, and I was absorbing that from all of these people. And what I learned was that there was a mountain change, Transantarctic Mountains, that crossed the interior of the continent, and there was a rift system under the Ross Sea and volcanoes, and nobody had really looked at those using modern structural geology techniques. So I thought, well, here we go. And I did finally get funded to go. I went first in 1989. I had small field teams. We worked with helicopters or did skidoo traverses out to look at the geology. And my comment here is really, at that time, first of all, I was mentored in my first trip to the ice by Amy. So don't think you can't be mentored by people younger than you. She'd been there a bunch of times, and I'd never been there, so that was huge. But I also met this community of support staff at Byrd, and that was super important for me because when I came to Ohio State, and subsequently, I was the only woman on the faculty. I was the first woman they hired into the School of Earth Science. I was the only woman on the faculty for 14 years. I did not have a cohort. But here, I discovered in Byrd all these strong, capable, fun women that, they loved a lot of the same things that I did. And that was really very important to me. So I have had a long Antarctic career. One, as good science does, if I can say that about myself, I guess I can. One question leads to the next, right? And so I found new approaches and new tools to start looking at the questions about the mountains and the rift basins and things using different tools. Got involved in geologic drilling, marine geophysics, finally GPS, that I continue to work on today. That led me to international collaboration, and you can see from my skill set being pictured here that obviously I was material to get a medal, as I did some years later from my collaboration skills. So these are just my final comments and more for the people at the early stages of your career. Go for it, people. Use your advisors, use your mentors and your network. Those are the people that can help you create your opportunities. Don't hold back because you think you can't do it. You can figure it out. We all do. Don't let things you can't control push you off your track. In my case, that was breast cancer. And it wasn't just, the health part of it. Well, I got over it. It was 12 years ago. I'm fine. But, another hurdle for me was getting through the physical qualification process. I was NPQ, those horrible words, and I pushed back super hard against the system to get beyond that. That was tough, and I just like to call out Kelly here for me, with the people she works with at USAF. She made a lot of great changes, and it's not quite as it was when I was fighting that battle, but you don't let it stop you. You may or may not change the system, but you yourself can change your attitude and keep going. So keep learning, find people you like to work with that will keep you going and motivated. Have fun, and by fun, I don't mean party time, really, although those who know me know that I do like party time. But I really mean, the hard work and the accomplishments and the experiences that you have. That's what's really fun. So with that.